Billy Meier case, and I think we're on Studio A. So we are live, Revolution Radio Studio A from 4 to 6 or about that time. I don't know if we're going to go for the full 2 hours or not. We'll just have to see. Let's talk about Billy Meier a little bit. On the 3rd of February 1941, Billy was living in Bulak, Switzerland, which was surrounded by the Eichen and Bruder Mountains, as well as by wide forests and extensive meadows. And it was in a mild night in May in 1941 that he sat down on a bench and he looked up at a beautiful starry sky, and he said, "My life is made out of the love of creation." And he didn't really know why he said that. He heard a voice in his head which had said these words, and then suddenly words formed on Billy's lips, and he said he since ancient times he'd lived among the stars, and he saw the light which the stars emitted, and he realized that there was an invisible light that he called the love of creation. So this young boy was having a very, very profound experience at a very, very young age. And of course, no one understood exactly what he was talking about when he tried to tell his parents or his family or his friends, except he told his local pastor in Bulak. Bulak is, again, in northern Switzerland, near the Eichen and Bruder Mountains, and there are very beautiful pine forests there and snow-capped mountains. And this was way back in 1941, so World War II was just beginning, and Billy went to talk to his pastor about this incredible experience that he had. And it just turned out that Pastor Rudolf Zimmerman had also had telepathic contacts at this point, and his telepathic contacts were with a group of extraterrestrials that called themselves the Pleiaren. They're human beings just like us, and they live on a planet called Ira, in a star system called the Pleiaren star system, which is some 80 light years beyond our Pleiades, although for years these extraterrestrials have been incorrectly called the Pleiadians. Svath Svath was Billy's first mentor. And after this tremendous experience on a mild night in May in 1941, Billy started to get these telepathic messages. And he was told to go out into the forest near his home in Switzerland, and then out of the sky would come a strange silvery pear-shaped craft which would sit down on the ground, and out would step a man who didn't have a helmet on, but had something like a suit that looked like a diver's suit, a gray suit. And Billy would step out of the forest into the clearing, and as a young boy, he was looking up at this ship and this man. And then he would be lifted up into the craft, and he would always explain that it felt as if ghostly hands were picking him up, and he would go off with Svath, and they would go high into the Earth's atmosphere or even into orbit. And one of the things that Svath always told Billy about was his previous lives, and the fact that Billy, in his lives on Earth, he had been the people that we call Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. And in each one of these lifetimes, he had taught an ancient universal teaching called the teaching of the Spirit. And much of this teaching was not understood on Earth, and it got twisted. And I would say about 75% of it got left out or more. And it was kind of absorbed into the religions of the Earth at that time. So, and here's this young boy who's listening to this extraterrestrial man who's about 1,000 years old, by the way. And this young boy, of course, really was astounded by all this, I'm sure, and was absolutely amazed. And he started to get a sense that he had a mission on the earth to fulfill. And Svath was here as the mentor for the first 11 years of this mission. You see, the spirit form of Edward Albert Meier is very ancient. It's about 9.6 billion years old, and Svath had technology that would allow him to track spirit forms. And he had already at that time knew that for the past 13,000 years, this spirit form had been reincarnating on the earth. And not only had it been these teachers, these spiritual teachers, but it had been other people from music and science, and philosophy. This same spirit form had incarnated as Galileo, had incarnated as Socrates, Aristotle, Mendelssohn, and Mozart, and as a mystic teacher in Russia, whose name just escapes me for the moment. But anyway, Billy had all these other incarnations. Well, Svath would later learn that his incarnations were even more ancient, in that he had been on other worlds, and that he had literally been the teacher that the Plejaren call Nocodamian. And there's a very, very interesting graphic in the Meier material that shows all these different incarnations that Billy had lived as. Rasputin, yes, my sidekick, or I shouldn't, my co-pilot here, Stephen Woods, just reminded me of Rasputin. I might even bring him on a little bit later. He can fill in some more details when my mind goes blank or whatever. But so Svath was Billy's first teacher. He was an extraterrestrial human of about 1,000 years old. The people are called the Plejaren, and they had actually been on the earth in the ancient past. For example, they had a civilization on earth 150,000 years ago, and the leader of that civilization was called Pelagon. And it was a very advanced civilization that lasted for several thousand years, I believe. Pelagon himself lived for 2,000 years. A very interesting story. Allegedly, I've read things somewhere that said that this man could levitate his own body. He could teleport himself around. He could cause plants to grow with his mind. He was very benevolent, though. He wasn't in any way negative. He followed what are called the creational natural laws, which we'll talk about a little bit. This was 150,000 years ago. When he finally did die, the king of wisdom, Rishwish, which took over for him, was not very spiritual, and the whole civilization kind of fell into warfare, and this warfare lasted for a while and pretty much almost completely destroyed the earth. Now, right around 133,000 years ago, there was a civilization called Atlantis. There were actually two Atlantean eras. And the first civilization, I believe, began about 133,000 years ago. And I won't go over all the details right now, but that civilization also destroyed itself. And right around 12,500 years ago is when the Atlantean civilization almost destroyed the earth, and the people of the earth had to basically crawl out of the rubble and start all over again. And we'll get to that most likely a little bit later. But so Svath was here to mentor Billy's material consciousness, and this is a technical term, so we'll have to start defining some of these terms in the Meier teaching. A material consciousness is who you are this lifetime. It's your conscious mind, it's your subconscious mind, it's your unconscious mind. We also have something called the spirit form. The spirit form is a fragment of what's called the universal consciousness. Universal consciousness is the consciousness, the intelligence, for lack of a better word, the intelligence behind our universe. It's this super intelligence that is evolving our universe. It's this intelligence also creates human spirit forms. So every person has a spirit form, every plant has a spirit form, every animal has a spirit form. And if you're a typical Earth human, your spirit form is about 4.5 million years old, I believe. It's described in one of Billy's books called The Psyche. And the spirit form comes into the body of a child when the child is 21 days old. And it brings in a new material consciousness. In the spirit realm, the spirit form is reviewing your past life. It's storing everything you've learned of value into these evolutive values, like your sense of confidence and optimism and logic and discernment and dedication, and all these evolutive values are stored by the spirit form in the spirit realm, and a new personality is created for the next incarnation. So it brings in the spirit form, comes into the body of a child and causes the heart to beat. It sends out energy throughout the entire body like a lattice structure. The heart starts to beat. The brain becomes conscious. And this little zygote, I guess it would be at 21 days. I don't know what the exact term would be in medically, but not a physical, completely formed physical human body at this point, I don't think. But it's conscious. It's at this point 21 days. It's alive. It's aware. Programmed into its subconscious mind are all these evolutive values, which I previously discussed. And I think other material, other information is stored in there, but this is kind of my own speculation. I speculate that some things that were really repeated in the previous life, and the Meier material doesn't say this, but I think this is why we get these tremendous virtuoso children, because some of the stuff that's been repeated enough goes into the subconscious and might be brought over into the next life. And that's just pure speculation again on my part. But the subconscious is very, very interesting. I've been listening to some of the lectures of Dr. Bruce Lipton. And he says during the first 7 years of our lives, we're pretty much in a state where we're almost in a hypnosis. We're in a theta state. We're not completely conscious, but what we're doing is more or less observing our parents, other members of our family, people like our teachers, people in society, and we're kind of downloading these behavioral habits. So the subconscious is getting trained for the first 7 years of your life. And you have this super quick learning, which is able to learn all this information. And right around 8 years old is when the conscious mind kicks in. So you've already had all of these behaviors, and some of them are negative. A lot of them are negative, actually, that are stored in your subconscious from the first 7 years of your life. So part of the training in the spiritual teachings is learning to always think consciously and to make conscious decisions and not to repeat habits like rotating negative thoughts, which is kind of the thing that we go through. A lot of times rotating negative thoughts or thoughts associated with anxiety or thoughts associated with fear. So each time that Billy would meet with Svath, they would go up into his ship, and then Svath would ask him to sit down, and there were these small screens in the ship where Billy could see people below them. And the ship sometimes would be up like 70,000 meters. But Billy, at this young age, and he's probably 5 or 6 years old at this time, already has the material consciousness development of like a 35-year-old man. And during one of the trips up there, Svath placed a device on Billy's head, which did a few things, one of which protected Billy's consciousness from those people that would want to break into his consciousness and would want to cause problems for Billy. The other thing it did was open up Billy's abilities from previous lifetimes, abilities to look into the future. So this device had many wires on it, and it was very strange, and Billy got this great wellspring of knowledge from it, and he felt these unusual forces penetrating into him, and suddenly he could see these events that would take place in the future. And again, Svath explained to him that certain abilities were awakened, that abilities that Billy had in previous lifetime. And Svath emphasized that his mission in life would be difficult and that he would have suffering. And Billy eventually became somewhat of a scapegoat in the village, and because Billy would spend more and more time with Svath, he was punished very severely by his fathers, because Billy spent a great deal of time skipping school, and sometimes Billy would be beaten until he could neither sit nor stand. So this was a very difficult, in some ways, a very difficult but very amazing experience that Billy was having. And it was interesting because Billy's words seemed to contain a vibration which has an inner power which kind of expresses his modesty and his love for human beings. And Billy has a very inspirational power that causes people to contemplate his words, which I've kind of noticed. Billy's real name is Edward, which means guardian of the treasure, and he's known worldwide as Beam. And he was told by Svath to establish himself in the background because the people of the earth create for themselves idols. And he was also told by Svath not to go into the public too much and to remain in the background, performing his mission in written form. And this written information, which is a little bit over 50 books now, it's a spiritual teaching that is designed to awaken the human race out of their sleep. And I'll say that the human race on earth here is more than just asleep. We are ill in our consciousness. And this teaching of the creational truth will become a worldwide movement that will bring peace, love, freedom to the human beings of the earth. But that will take about 800 years for the people of the earth to start to really turn around. So this show is the beginning, I would like to say. Hopefully, it's some small part of the turnaround that's going to occur and the slow change that's going to occur over the next 800 years. One of the things that Svath taught Billy was our connection with all things. And one of the things that Billy describes is that we have the ability to have peace, concord, knowledge, wisdom, freedom, harmony all the time. And Billy explains that the entire universe is one, and it's bound together. And Svath told Billy the biggest problem with the people of the earth is they do not understand what the creation is. And the creation has a physical body and a consciousness. The creation is, in many terms, the universe. The creation is a neutral, positive, spiritual energy. It's the driving force behind the evolution in our universe. It creates spirit forms as a part of its own evolution. So the purpose for your life is to evolve your consciousness. So evolution is part of what is going on right now, what we're doing here. And just to fill in a little bit more background information, Billy has had, and we'll swing back to this, Billy has had several teachers. The first 11 years of his life, he had this man named Spoth that we've been talking about for the beginning of the show here. And then Billy was told to go up on top of a hill and that he would get the opportunity to meet his second teacher. Well, when he climbed to this top of this hill in Switzerland, he was about 16 years old. And this hill, a lot of times, he would just sit and think on, and or meditate. And then out of the sky, and I think it was becoming evening, and out of the sky he saw this strange craft with these 3 strange circular landing spheres, which landed nearby where he was standing. It was kind of a cold evening, and the ship hatch opened, and Billy walked over, and again, he said he felt like if he was lifted up by ghostly hands, which you'll hear that a lot in the contact reports. And he was pulled into the ship, and he sat down on this chair. There was a flash of light, and he held up his hand just as an instinctual reaction. And he couldn't even see his own hand, and he couldn't see the ship anymore. He couldn't see his own body. And the ship started to levitate and lifted up off the hill and went slowly over to his village where he was living, and it kind of hovered over his house, and then it shot off at a great speed. Now, this all occurred right around 1953. I'm not going to tell all the details. This is a long story we could probably spend an hour on, but the ship landed, a robotic ship. There was no other crew members in there, and it landed in Jordan. And Billy stepped out, and he realized that he was in Jordan. He saw the red rocks and the red sand and the heat. And then out of the sky comes what looks like a falling star. He realizes is a 300-meter spacecraft, which lands, and eventually out steps a woman named Asket, who would be his new teacher, his new mentor for the next 11 years. Now, he immediately realized that he knew her, and it must have been from previous lives, because Svoth had taught him about his previous lives. I'm getting a message here on Skype. Stand by, please. In any case, I'm in the middle of telling you about Billy's meeting with Asket. Asket is a woman from the Tao universe. The Tao universe is a parallel universe to our universe. Our universe was created 46 trillion years ago, as was this Tao universe. And one of the major differences between the two universes is that the stars in the Tao universe are much closer together. So, Asket is telling Billy about some things that they're about to do. So Asket and Billy leave the area, and Asket's ship, the ship is cloaked. It lands near the Giza Plateau, in walking distance of the Giza Plateau. And Billy notices the strange animal human that he calls the Sphinx. And they both have technology that makes them invisible. And they go underground, and they see a giant spacecraft, and they see strangely dressed guards, and he sees crucifixion utensils that seem to be related to the crucifixion of Christ. And he's very, very, I won't tell the whole story again. It's a very interesting story, particularly about the Giza intelligences, who are an extraterrestrial group that were on the earth until about the 1970s. And in the 1970s, they finally left the Earth. They were pushed off the Earth, but there's a long story associated with these Giza intelligences. They appeared shortly after the fall of Atlantis and Lemuria, and there was a very interesting lineage of people that came to the Earth. The first one, I believe, was Eris the 11th. Eris the 11th was a descendant of Eris, the barbarian, who was the guy that got the Great War between Atlantis and Lemuria started. So anyway, these Giza intelligences is what I'm describing. Eris the 11th was eventually murdered by his son Jehovah. Now, Jehovah ruled the earth until about 3,660 years ago. And one of the things these Giza intelligences always did is tell whoever was the ruler would tell the people of the earth that he was the creator. In other words, he created everything. So they must have had tremendously advanced powers to be able to pull this off. So Jehovah was murdered by his son Giza about 340 years into his father's reign. Now Giza became megalomaniacal just like his father. He claimed to be the creator and he wanted to be celebrated as such. These people were brutal dictators and they were murderers. And again, Ascot is showing Billy what they were like in 1953. They still had an organization deep below the Giza Plateau. They influenced the people of the earth through these telenotic, kind of hypnotic impulses, which would put people in this very suggestive frame of mind. And they were using religions to control the earth. Now, what I was just doing was talking about the ancient Giza intelligences, particularly about Jehovah. Again, and who was murdered by his son Giza about 340 years into his father's reign. Giza was really megalomaniacal. He called himself the creator of all things. And he was murdered by his own son, Eris. And there was this great conflict that took place between Eris and his younger brothers, Ptah and Solemn. And Ptah and Solemn got enough people together, whatever, to drive Eris off the earth. Well, eventually Eris came back with 72,000 followers. And they went below the Giza Plateau into these old cubicle constructions, this area had not been inhabited for like 70,000 years. So this is kind of a quick overview of the Giza intelligences. Eris ruled until about 3010 BCE, and then Hen, who was called Jehovah, took over for Eris. Hen was the nephew of Jehovah. The nephew of Eris. Hen was called Jehovah. Hen is the God of the Old Testament, according to the Meier information. The same God that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. The same God that inspired the genocide that the Jews described in Numbers chapter 31, etc., etc. You can understand why there have been 20 attempts on Billy's life, because this information is very controversial. Now, I am what I consider a non-controversial person. I don't really have an interest in controversy, but it seems that on the earth, if you're interested in finding out what really happened, that you're going to get information that is very, very controversial. Now, eventually, right around 2080 BC, Hen, or Jehovah, was forced out of his office, so to speak, by his nephew. So it must be the two nephews here. Kamagal the first. Now, Kamagal took over leadership of the Giza intelligences. Eventually, Kamagal II took over and led the Giza intelligences until about December of 1976. Now, during World War II, the Giza intelligences influenced the people in the Thule Society, and there was a guy named Hermann Steinschneider, who was also known as Erich Janssen, I believe, who was the guy that kind of twisted Hitler and pushed Hitler over the edge and made him a crazy person. Well, originally Hitler wasn't that way. He was going to be a very positive force on the earth, but these Giza intelligences twisted this very, very much. So it's important to remember the Giza intelligences are no longer on the earth, but they were a splinter group of the Pleiadians themselves that really didn't follow these creational natural laws that we started to discuss when I was talking about what the spirit form is. So maybe it's a good, let me step back again to the spirit form, because we were talking about the spirit form of Edward Albert Meyer. What is the spirit form? The spirit form comes into the body of the child at 21 days. Now, the spirit form is your spiritual consciousness. It has a controlling element called the Gemut. The Gemut controls the thoughts and feelings of your spiritual consciousness. And I'll read a little bit from Billy's book called The Psyche, which tells us about what the Gemut is. The Gemut is referred to as that spiritual block and factor which, within the spirit body of a life form, in this case a human being, regulates and looks after the spirit consciousness-based feelings and the spirit consciousness-based thoughts in itself. So it's contrary to the psyche. Now, the psyche is the part of the material consciousness which controls the thoughts and the feelings associated with the spiritual consciousness. So again, I think I might have mentioned this earlier, that every human being has a spiritual consciousness and a material consciousness. So the spirit consciousness relates to who you were in all of your previous lives, which, by the way, we don't remember. And it's a good thing in our current level of evolution that we don't remember, because can you imagine recalling all the trauma that you've had in all of those lives for 4.5 million years? I'm sure you've had trauma in this life that you're glad that you've forgotten, that you've been able to let go, whether it's the death of your father and mother if they're gone, or the death of brothers or sisters or cousins, or your favorite pet, or a pet that was very close to you. All of these traumas that you experience in a given life, if you could, at our current level of evolution, if you could recall all those traumas, you would probably go insane. You could never pull your thoughts back out of a very, very negative spiral that would probably occur from all of those traumas that you've experienced. So one of the things that we get from the Meier spiritual teachings is the ability to deal with trauma, but because we learn how to control our thinking. The purpose of this ancient spirit form, which we were talking about, that currently resides in the superior colliculus of Edward Albert Meyer, and the superior colliculus is that part of your middle brain where you kind of integrate all your senses. It's a very important part of your brain. The spirit form is lodged in there on the roof of the middle part of the brain. And one of the things that you have to learn, and if you don't learn this, you can also go insane, is learning to control your thoughts. Because controlling our thoughts is the key to success and the key to happiness in life. If you don't control your thoughts, your thoughts will control you. In other words, your thoughts are extremely powerful. So you can have negative thoughts, or you can have what are called neutral positive thoughts. And these probably are also things that Swath taught Billy, to learn to be neutral positive, even if you're getting unfair treatment, even if you're dealing with a difficult circumstance. And another spiritual principle, we'll have to say, is that anytime you're making progress spiritually in life, something will pop up that will also add to the resistance against your spiritual momentum. This is also a principle that'll come up. So it's very, very interesting, because this whole Meier information starts out as a story about extraterrestrials, a story about ancient history, then goes into a story about reincarnation, and then it goes into certain spiritual principles, kind of a self-help kind of thing. How to, what you can do in this lifetime to have a success and benefit yourself. So this is kind of the strangeness. I call it kind of a strangeness, because particularly the program is called Ohio Exopolitics, and we were really about UFOs and extraterrestrials. But after years and years and years of studying UFOs and extraterrestrials, I kept coming back to this particular case, because this is the one where I learned the most. I continue to learn more and more and more. And one thing that I noticed that happened is there's a certain level of cognitive dissonance that occurs while you have to relearn some things, because there's false information that we've absorbed. Now, one of the false things that we've been taught is about the soul. There's really a spirit form that you have. It's in the middle of your brain, in the area called the superior colliculus. It cannot be harmed by anything in the physical world. It will never become sick. It will never become disturbed. It's called a Telstock in the German, or fragment of the universal consciousness. And there are billions of people on the earth. We all have spirit forms. The plants have spirit forms. The animals have spirit forms. So there's this interesting duplicity that we are a spiritual being with a physical body. So now, contrary to your psyche, your material consciousness can have bad thoughts, destructive thoughts. The Gemut, the spiritual consciousness, cannot have negative thoughts. It can only have neutral, positive ones. And therefore, that means that the only powers corresponding to an equalized neutral, positive thoughts come from the Gemut. So the Gemut always exhibits a harmony. Now, your psyche or your material consciousness benefits from this harmony. If the material consciousness feels this harmony, listens to the impulses of the spiritual consciousness, of the swinging waves of the spiritual consciousness, then the psyche can also have harmony and balance. So that is the primary goal of this teaching, in many ways, is to achieve and maintain in the material consciousness the balance that exists in the spiritual consciousness. Now, we also have something called feelings. We were taught a little bit about, we were talking about the thoughts that we have and the importance of controlling our thoughts. And that thoughts need to be neutral, positive. That means they're mostly positive, but you have an aware of the negative. You don't you don't try to push the negative out of your life. Because if you do, you're going to go out of control. In order to be a neutral positive, you have to be accepting the negative that exists in your life. So we have thoughts and we also have feelings. The feelings grow out of the thoughts. So it's important to recognize that the feelings are something that you really shouldn't suppress, because the feelings naturally grow out of the thoughts. Now, there's also a difference between feelings and emotions. Emotions rise up out of control all of a sudden. The emotions can be very, very dangerous. So two of the things that Billy's mentors, although we don't have a lot of information about them giving this kind of teaching, but I speculate that both Ascot and Svath taught Billy about neutral positive thinking, taught Billy about the thoughts and the feelings, and taught Billy not to be emotional, to learn to be neutral positive and in harmony. Because I think he expressed this at a very, very young age, and that's why the people in his village were always wanting to talk to him. They enjoyed being around him because he was in this neutral positive state all the time. He was in control of his emotions probably at a very, very young age, and that's why he could endure the beatings that he got from his father, the unjust beatings. And later in life, he would have like 20 attempts on his life, because many, many people did not want this information to get out. And I think it's true today is the same way, that many, many people do not want this information as well to get out. Now, the less advanced the human being is in his or her evolution, the more uncontrolled they react towards the thoughts and the feelings, thus also the emotions. And this is described in the book, The Psyche. And let me read a little here about what it says about feelings. Feelings, together with the material consciousness and thus with the personality, represent the block and factor of the mentality. And as in the mentality block, they are also uncountable factors in the feelings. They result in the form of the feelings. Thus, the feelings not only appear as joy, vexation, and sorrow, but also as horror, rage, concern, surprise, love, hatred, sympathy, antipathy, aggression, antisociality, bloodthirstiness, criminal tendency, industriousness or unindustriousness, religious tendency or truth tendency, phobias or hopes, and so on and so forth. And whatever forms the feelings are generated as a sarton, they are always evolution dependent, even if the feelings are primal and unavoidable. So the less advanced the human being is in his or her evolution, the more uncontrolled they react towards their thoughts and feelings and thus their emotion. But if a human being lives in a higher evolution, then he or she also strives to better control their feelings and to form them according to their higher evolution and to live them out, through which, together with the material consciousness, his or her mentality is also imprinted. That comes to the expression as consciousness imprinting, and thus also as the personality. So as you learn to control your emotions, thoughts, and feelings, this imprints on your personality. So anyway, very, very interesting information in the book called The Psyche. I think some of the most advanced of Billy's information is in the book The Psyche. And I was talking earlier about reincarnation. And let me read a little section here about Earth humans and their spirit form. It says, Because the human beings of Earth themselves, those created on the Earth, are still so young, regarding their evolution, they are only beginning to change their last baby shoes. While those human beings living on the Earth, who originally came from the far reaches of outer space, only have a total age of 8 to 12 million years. So the oldest spirit forms on the Earth are 8 to 12 million years old. These were people that came to the Earth on ships. Most spirit forms on Earth are 4 to 5 million years old. And again, we are not at a high enough level of evolution, thank goodness, to recall all of our previous lives. Eventually, we'll have to leave the Earth to continue to evolve, because our spirit forms will it takes many millions, even billions of years for the spirit form to evolve. And let me read what Billy says here. Therefore, the human being of Earth is not yet in a position to comprehend all nuances and forms of feeling, and so these will remain inaccessible to the human beings of Earth for a still very long time. So there's many things about our feelings and the nuances thereof that we don't understand yet. And I remember reading this many times, and it's very, very interesting. When the human being of Earth is able to do this, understand all the nuances of all their feelings, they will be living somewhere on different planets, because the blue planet will not exist for as long as the human being needs for his or her evolution. So the Earth humans will have to leave this beautiful blue planet sometime in the future. And that's why technological advance is so important. Otherwise, there's a whole nother process that takes place, which is very, very, I imagine, much more difficult. So let's recap a little bit of what I've said here about reincarnation, because there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of moving parts. The spirit form comes into the body of a child 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. It sends its radiating energy throughout the whole body in a lattice structure. The heart starts to beat. The thoughts begin in the consciousness. In the subconsciousness are all the evolutive values of the previous lifetimes. But the consciousness has to grow up again. It has to learn again. And it has to be trained again. So you have to learn a language again. You have to learn to walk and talk. But you'll get impulses from your spirit form, so it makes it much easier to evolve quickly and get up to speed as a child when you've had all these previous lives. Now, when we die, the spirit form leaves the body, and it goes in the spiritual realm. There's an energy band around our planet where the spirit form goes, and it takes with it the consciousness of the previous life, and this consciousness goes into the spirit realm. And the spirit realm is where the time you spend time in the spirit realm between each lifetime. So let me explain it a little bit. If you spend 100 years in the physical lifetime, you'll spend about 152 years in the spirit realm. And what is happening in the spirit realm at this time is that the experiences are being distilled down into their evolutive values. Okay, in order to evolve, what we call the creation makes spirit forms. And these spirit forms evolve independently from the creation through what's called the material consciousness. The goal of the spirit form in each lifetime is to gather wisdom and knowledge through countless reincarnations. And the spirit form, again, when it enters into its body of a child, its goal is to collect wisdom and knowledge. So the spirit form that we have right now at our evolution, which I think is about 4.5 million years old, it needs these material experiences to evolve. So the spirit form is not independent so much from these material consciousness. I'll read to you a definition of the creation from a book called The Decalogue by Billy Meier. And this definition, you won't completely understand, but it will maybe plant some things in your subconscious. It says, the creation is the being and the non-being of life. It is the most immense mass of spiritual energy in the universe. It is spirit in its purest form and unmeasurable in its wisdom, knowledge, love, harmony, and truth. It is something that is pure spiritual intelligence energy. The spirit, again, is kind of ungraspable. The creation we cannot completely grasp. The creation prevails over and stands in an unstoppable evolution. The creation is wisdom and love. So the universal consciousness is like this juggernaut which just continues to make stars and planets and galaxies over trillions and trillions of years. And your spirit form is a little fragment of this universal consciousness. And when the spirit form is in the spirit realm, it creates something called the overall consciousness block. And the overall consciousness block is a storage bank in the spirit realm where your consciousness from the previous life is kind of dissolved and absorbed by your spirit form, and a new one is built up. So the overall consciousness block creates and programs the new consciousness and the new personality. The consciousness block, again, it contains your personality, your consciousness, and your ego. And the consciousness gains values from your material life. And again, to repeat, on the 21st day after conception, the spirit form and the consciousness block, they enter into your body, your heart starts to beat, and the spirit of the superior colliculus is where the spirit form goes. And the spirit form also, its energy enters within the human body. And here is something that I don't completely understand by any means yet, is that even though the spirit form enters within the human body, it remains in its own realm, which I'm not sure I completely understand. The spirit form is unable, again, to be influenced by anything in the material world through sickness, disease. The ego represents our personality to a more or less degree. And your material consciousness, it independently researches, perceives, and consciously learns and processes results. And the evolutive values are the truth and reality that you learn in a given life. The evolutive values are transferred in an impulse-based form from material consciousness to the spiritual consciousness. And the spirit form further processes these and will store these evolutive values for all time. And I'm wondering if we're at the top of the hour, and are we running out of time yet? That's hard to say. Well, I'll continue on until I get a message from my producer, Oop, there's the music. We'll take about a 5-minute break, and we'll be right back.
Amazing jewelry, specifically the revolutionary
Hello, everyone. I guess I'm on the air. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what's going on here at Revolution Radio. For some reason, I do not hear the commercials, the bumper music, through my earphones. But I do have a producer out there, Stephen Woods. He's kind of been helping out on the show. I guess I'm going to put him on the spot a little bit and also continue. I think we'll talk a little bit more about the spiritual teachings in the second half of the show. I will probably go back and cover some stuff that's talked about in the Might of Thoughts. I will try to cover a little bit of that stuff. There's a lot of good information there that I think we need to pay attention to. I think the book, The Might of Thoughts, may be maybe the most important. I don't know if you can say such a thing with the Meier material. What is the most important of this material? I guess it all is to a certain degree. But one of the things I wanted to talk about again was tangled ideas and how they confuse the thoughts, but maybe I'll go ahead and drag Stephen into this conversation here. I may not go the full 2 hours. So let me see if I brought him in here. Stephen, are you there? He's probably still connecting. We may not be able to drag Stephen. Stephen, are you there?
I am.
Well, welcome to the show. You've been standing by for a whole hour. I really appreciate that. During that flood of information, did you have any questions or comments or anything that you thought was something you'd like to chat more about?
Well, I will, but I'm hearing your old tape in my ear set right now, so I'm going to have to put you on pause for a second.
Okay. So you're listening, you mean the on the air, the delay? I guess Stephen was hearing the delay. There seems to be a delay. I'll say that. I noticed that when he told me to come on the air, I was actually also listening to the bumper music, which was still going on. Is that what you were talking about?
There we go. Yeah, I just had to shut off your program, so there is a delay.
Okay. So we don't have to go the whole hour, at least the whole additional hour. I kind of like to keep things to an hour. I think this material, an hour of this material, is enough for anyone to try to absorb. So did you write anything down, anything kind of strike you? Questions, comments? Okay, what do you got there?
Well, going back to your Pelagon statement and how he led for 2,000 years, it made me think about, here he is for that long of a time doing what he did in a good way, but his replacement wasn't very good.
Right.
And looking at the way to live, there's I think on page 2, it talks about the stages
of evolution,
or 7 steps of education.
Of education.
Yeah,
oh, that's a good point. That's something I don't talk about much. Is that in which book? The Way to Live?
That's in Way to Live. Yeah.
Okay. On what page is that again? 7?
Right at the beginning, page 2.
Page 2. The 7 steps of education. Yeah, there it is.
Mm-hmm. So the 7th step is the human being is then capable of correcting, ordering, forming, harmonizing, and leading a group of human beings, the mass of humanity, the country, and the world in a form which is wise, which is fair to the human being, and which is creational, natural law based.
Wow. What a responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to run away from my responsibilities. I'm ready to go back into degeneracy. I think that's where I want to be.
Yeah. But seeing that he was such a good leader, but yet there was no one to follow him in his steps that would be to his caliber. Is that an indictment on him for failure? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's each person's responsibility to do it themselves. But
that's a good point. I never thought of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he did bear a little bit of responsibility.
I think any leader has a responsibility to train his replacement. I mean,
wow, that's a profound. I never thought of that. The whole story about Pelagon. I've never ever. I just got bits and pieces of that story, and I remember that I think there's a lot more, but there's a certain amount of the contact reports that aren't translated yet, which drives me a little crazy because they should be translated by now. But I guess it's a lot of work to translate.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I've never really focused on that. I've tried to focus on, there's just so much to learn. Like any one of these books, and I say this all the time. Probably people on Revolution Radio haven't heard me say this, but any of these books that you read, like The Might of Thoughts, which I don't even know how many times I've read now, maybe 8 or 10. Every time you read it, you find something even more profound than you ever realized before, and you realize that you'll never be an expert on this. I mean, I think there's one expert, and that's Billy. Nobody is ever going to be able. I mean, you can take any of these 3-4 books that we're talking about, and I think the only 4 books have been translated. Any of these 4 books, you could study for the rest of your life, and you're still going to be learning. Which is, I've never experienced that on any other book. What about you? Have you ever experienced that before?
No, not at all. I mean, this is where I feel encouraged, though, with patience and just as, like you said, if I don't get through all the books in this lifetime, matter. It's okay. Because you know what? I can see right now that I've gone over several of them, and it's going to take a long time to let it sink in and to practice this every day and to put it to fruition in your life.
Oh, absolutely. So that brings up another point, because like for a radio show, I never had an interest to have a self-help radio show, but that's what this is going to become. I got a feeling.
It has been for me. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
for sure.
I'm interested. I've always been interested in the extraterrestrial aspect of things and ancient history and all that, but it's not as important as this other stuff. And I just have to face that.
Yeah. Just like, you're talking about the neutral positive. And for me at the beginning, it was somewhat of a vague term, I guess, if you would. I didn't really know what neutral positive meant.
Yeah.
And reading some of the other material, a good concrete example is for any virtue, usually it's a mean between two things, between a positive and a negative. So you take the virtue of courage. Well, on the negative side would be a coward who fears something that he shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And on the positive side, over positive, it's a reckless person who fears nothing. But a courageous person is a person who has fear, but he goes, he fights that with knowledge and wisdom to overcome it.
Right.
And so that would be an example of a neutral positive virtue.
So in other words, with neutral positive, you still have fear. You still see the negative.
Right.
But it stays in balance. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, and that was, through that, his prior personality, Aristotle, that was one of his things that he taught. So I found it interesting how it ties in with his current personality.
You're reading about Aristotle right now too, right?
Slowly, yeah. It's a hard read, but yeah.
Tell us more about that. That sounds like a hard read.
That's what I'm getting from.
What's the name of the book? Sorry to interrupt you.
I've got that book. I left it at work, but I read that on my breaks at work. But it's just like his teachings. There's several different books included in the one, but yeah.
Oh, maybe I'll have to order some of that.
It's a dry read, to be honest with you, but it's good, But there's a lot of information in it. Yeah. I'd rather much read these books here. So.
Oh, would you?
Oh yeah.
Wow. Now you had a background in Hebrew as well, right?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I studied it for probably 7 years as far as the religious form of growing up is what I had. You know what I mean? So.
Now, were you involved in Judaism or in Christianity?
No, I started out Christianity, and then I went into what's the Hebrew roots movement is what I think they call it.
Okay.
So I did that for several years, and then started having a lot of questions I couldn't get answers to, and then I discovered this case, and it brought a lot of things into perspective, which answered questions I had for a long time. So
the interesting thing about Hebrew and Greek, the Bible again is written, the New Testament mostly in Koine Greek, and the Old Testament is written in Hebrew as well as Aramaic. And of course, I've said this a million times in the show. The interesting thing is there is no analogous letter to the letter J. And there was no letter J in the ancient world. Now, this poses a humongous problem if you are influenced by logic, as Aristotle was, correct?
Right.
So there could have been no one named Jesus. There could have been no one named Jeremiah. There could have been no one named James or John or even Julius Caesar. So you have to realize that all of these names have been changed, which is, I was floored by that when I learned that.
Yeah, and see, one of the things that was very difficult for me to come out of that is when you start learning, and I think anyone that came from that or is in Hebrew roots right now listening to this would understand that, especially in the Hebrew language, which they talk about quite a bit, there's a lot of very deep things, patterns and gematria things that it's very hard to explain, and it's very, you think it's spiritual, I guess, if you will, when you're in that. And so you put a lot of weight on what the Bible says because you see all these patterns and you see how intricate it is. But yet I still had questions, in the end about love and why all the killing and why are these things there? And that doesn't look like love to me.
That's a good
But
point.
but I saw this higher level things that, I looked at and thought, well, how could a human being just write that? There's chiastic structures in the language and just all kinds of things that are like hidden, and most people don't know about it. It's just very interesting.
You bring up a good point there, and I have a lot of friends and even guests that have a deep interest in the original languages, and like you said, there are these profound things in there, and that's what's so confusing about religion.
Right.
On the one hand, you do run into these profound truth, and then yet on the other hand, these blatant, I don't know what the word I want to use is, but these, let's just call them problems for lack of things to say. For example, my favorite, one of my big problems growing up, and I can remember this back when I was 13, 12, 11 years old, or whatever age I was, reading the beginning of the Old Testament and the story of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and Cain kills Abel, and like with no explanation whatsoever. And like the next chapter, or the next few verses, it's talking about Cain being in the land of Nod and taking a wife and building a city. And I'm like, wait a minute, what happened here? So, and then I go through the whole thing. Okay, Adam's 930 years old, and maybe he had all these kids, but it never said that, So why would there be these gigantic omissions of information? You know what I mean?
Sure. I think, I think I mentioned it to you before that is it possible that these Giza intelligences who have this higher knowledge of Ishwish, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they know these patterns in creation, like we see, like the number 7 and all these different things, if they incorporated that into the teachings of, say, Judaism with the festivals that they celebrate and that hidden knowledge being woven into those things.
Wow.
For a reason, see? And that's where some of the stuff is kind of just subtly hidden in that.
I think that's very perceptive. I think you've got something there.
And that's, what is a teletic impulse,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If we spend the first 7 years of our lives in a theta state where we're not completely conscious or mostly unconscious. And that's one thing that Dr. Bruce Lipton teaches, that, what was the religious group in Catholicism? Was it I forget which group it is exactly off the top of my head, but they say, give me a child for 7 years and we'll teach him, and for the rest of his life, he will follow the church. I forget which group that is that says that, but so that first 7 years of your life, I think we're completely an open book, and we can be completely brainwashed. It's almost like we're under hypnosis, which is wild.
Yeah.
It's just something I've learned here recently with Dr. Bruce Lipton. I guess Billy doesn't really talk about that in great detail, but he does talk about the fact that the unconscious mind, and in other words, there's tremendous power in the unconscious mind, And a lot of our lives, when we're alive and we're living, we're not really conscious. We're just functioning on these automatic behaviors.
It's kind of scary, isn't it?
It's really scary. I don't know if you've ever driven and you're like, and you think back, oh my goodness, I don't remember the last 4 miles. Well, I was on automatic or something and I drove. What just happened? It's like, oh my goodness. That's very scary.
I think we've all had that on vacation or something. You're driving, and the next thing you know, you missed your exit, and not even paying attention, but just talking and
on automatic. So one of the things I wanted to cover in the second half of the show here, and it'd be interesting to get your feedback on this, because I came across, and we don't have to go the whole hour. I'm going to just not force myself to go 2 hours. I think it's almost too long to talk about my material personally, but in page 224 of The Might of Thoughts, there's this interesting sentence which says, "This is a contrast to entangled ideas, confuse the thoughts, and abruptly go from one extreme to another, whereby a misdirection of the thoughts arises, which triggers emotions and can even lead to manslaughter and murder." And this was just a page, one of these pages in this book that I just felt like is just a huge amount of information there. For example, the idea, first of all, it says tangled ideas. So what does the word tangled mean? It means to be twisted, to be untidy, to be matted, to be confused, to be jumbled up, to be mixed up, to be messy, to be chaotic. And I know that I've been in that state before. And then one of the interesting things, and this is just Billy's own definition, I think, when he says tangled ideas, well, an idea is something that isn't completely thought through. Mm-hmm. It's this kind of, you get this notion to do something and you haven't thought it through. And you may have thought it through a little bit. And then I've noticed myself when I get in this state, because he's really describing a state that I've been in before, I will hold on to the idea, again, which isn't completely thought through, and try to defend it. But you will notice that the idea will eventually confuse the thoughts. And I've seen myself do this before, and abruptly go from one extreme to another. So you get this misdirection of thoughts, which triggers emotions and can even lead to manslaughter and murder. Now, I know, Stephen, you've listened to my show a lot, and you probably remember me talking about this. So I'm just wondering if you have anything you could share or add to that.
Boy, right now, no. I'm just listening to you.
Okay.
Yeah, on that one. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't have any deeper insights, no.
Okay. So anyway, the tangled ideas, they can do the following. They can confuse the thoughts. They can make the thoughts go from one extreme to another. They can cause the misdirection of thoughts. They can trigger emotions. And remember, emotions are different than feelings. And emotions, when you start to run on emotions, the next thing that can happen is that can lead to manslaughter and murder. So suddenly you're a criminal, and you can trace it back by having an idea that you hadn't completely thought through. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that, I think of mixture, right? And how you just said it's a bad thing to have this mixture. Well, like evening is a mixture between day and night. And you have a hard time differentiating or seeing detail at that time of night. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? So if you're looking out in the distance, it's hard to tell what it actually is when there's a mixture. Mm-hmm. And even back to that Hebrew roots movement, that's where you hear a lot of negativity about the mixtures of the people.
Oh, you mean like racial mixture, or
mixing yourself with unbelievers, or all but
interesting, very, very interesting.
But it's a confusion when there's that mixture of day and night. There's a confusion, or you can't see clearly, and so that's about my only add to that.
No, that was good. That was very, very good. I just had a thought there. But here we are, we're living our lives, and we think we're normal, and suddenly, by following this idea that we haven't completely thought through, which is different than an ideal, which is something, an ideal with an L is something we've completely thought through, but the idea we haven't completely thought through. And we've triggered emotions, we've had a misdirection of thoughts, and this is when we can get into murder and manslaughter. And I know when you get into this kind of unclear, perplexed, bewildered, disoriented state of mind, that you can do things that otherwise you would never do. And so I've always been very grateful that I've never crossed the line and never, had to deal with, okay, now you're ready for prison.
Is that a point before belief, though? Is if you're being pushed to believe in something, it just makes you more susceptible to do that impulsive thing that they want you to do.
Isn't that interesting? See, and I think that's one of the things the Meier teaching will pull you out of. And you'll be able, that's one of the things I noticed is that when I was still more influenced by religion and Christianity, that my thoughts would run wild a whole lot easier than they would now. I don't know, do you remember any of that? Or
Oh, for sure. 100%. Yeah. Fear.
Fear, anxiety. Oh, yeah. And that's what the blessing of this is. So we don't fall into this area where virtue and rationality is lost. And I think until you get these skills of perception, you can fall into an area where irrationality, virtuelessness start to govern the consciousness. And another thing that I notice is, Billy talks about setting the zeal or the life determination, and that once I was used to be in that state, I cannot imagine or realize the zeal, the life determination. I'm just kind of running on these ideas which are incomplete, and I become trapped by these ideas. I've seen that happen to me where my thoughts just kind of run out of control. And for some reason, I remember the last meeting that I had, and I was in this kind of Bible study group, and not to say anything bad about them or the group. It was a fine group of people. But the last meeting, and it was just when I was starting to come into this, learning about this material, the last meeting, at the very end of the meeting, I just had this horrible sick feeling. I just can't explain it. And then driving on the way home, I had to literally stop the car and literally throw up. And I knew that I would never, ever go back. And I didn't know why, because it was like my unconscious just knew something. I can't explain it. I can't explain it.
Well, if I can just give a word of encouragement to anyone else out there that was like myself, who was wrapped up in religion and that cognitive dissonance of entertaining the thought that this concept I had of God could be wrong, was very difficult for me to overcome. And but now that I've studied this for a couple of years now, I'm more happy and peaceful, and I know that my life is on the right track than I ever had before. But it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of reading, to overcome those doubts I had. But it makes sense, and it's clear, and there's nothing out of balance with it. And that's what I love about it. There's nothing where I have to justify it or put it on a back burner because I don't understand a concept. It's all makes sense.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's very, very good. So let me talk about the difference again between an idea without an L and an ideal with an L. So the ideas that you have, which are not complete, we must completely work through these. And when you start to work through your ideas, you will recognize that, yeah, there were some values in there, which you were right about, but there were also some unvalues, and that's what Billy talks about. So we work to gain the values from the ideas, which are the things which are progressive and higher. And as we do, we start to create this evolutive attitude. So the goal is to continually start to conform to this evolutive attitude that you're starting to develop. And slowly, you will remove the unvalues from your ideas, and they will turn into ideas, life determinations, which can be brought to fruition. Because the flip side of this whole might of thoughts thing is that negative thoughts can have a great power with them, just like neutral positive ones can. And the problem with the negative thoughts is that they generate bad outcomes in your life. So the whole idea is to develop your idea into an ideal, and then you create this inner persistence, and you can move into education. So I wanted to cover a little something from Figure Bulletin 68, and this is something I've talked about before, but I think it's really important. And it takes a while to start to really digest this. So, and this is supposedly, again, I will say supposedly, and I shouldn't say that really, but Billy is still meeting with these extraterrestrials, and one of them is named Ptah. And I didn't talk about Semjase today, but Billy was, I guess, supposed to have 11 years of mentoring from Semjase, but she had an accident. It's a long story. So those contacts were cut short, and then it seems like Billy has been focused with these periodic discussions with Ptah and Quetzal. Ptah is supposed to be the commander of this mothership. Quetzal, interestingly, was the commander of the forces that were in our solar system, which I don't think are there anymore. Because, and this is another side story, in 1985, these extraterrestrials left. And maybe I'll go back over that in another show, or if we have a little time. But Quetzal was also the what they call Quetzalcoatl, who was the feathered serpent that you've heard about in ancient aliens or in some of these archaeology shows. But anyway, Ptah is speaking here, and he says, again, which is in the middle of this conversation, so we'll have to catch up here between Billy and Ptah. And he says, which happens out of self-protection and boastfulness and so on. But listen to what is observed in the relation to the behavior patterns of the psychopaths in many regards. There are thereby many factors which I want to list in a decisive wise. Thus, a great number of the following unvalues are usually characteristic of psychopaths. Now, why am I talking about this? Because at the very beginning in the Might of Thoughts book, it says, the people of the earth are ill in our consciousness. And I always remember my buddy Nathaniel Mallow, who I met at the Munns Park study, which he was struck by this just the same way I was. The fact that we are ill in our consciousness, which is profound when you think of a whole world of human beings, which I think is close to 9 billion now, which are not healthy. So we're talking about psychopaths here. What is the unvalues that psychopaths have? They have a lack of logical decisions, a lack of rational conduct, irresponsible activity. They frequently change their sexual partner. They have pathological lying. They have promises they make that they break. They also have exaggerated thoughts and feelings in regards to their value. They have another thing is boredom. A psychopath is very easily bored. They have deceitful behavior. They have parasitism. They have a deficiency with regard to real and long-term results in many forms. They have a manipulative behavior with regard to their fellow human beings. They have a selfish lifestyle. They like to delude or seduce other people. They have a lack of guilt consciousness, a lack of behavior control. Now, here's something that they talk about, which I don't even know what it means. I'll have to say. They say imponderable ability. Let me see if I can find a definition for that. And I do that a lot, is try to define terms. Imponderable, a factor which is difficult or impossible to estimate or assess. A difficult or impossible to estimate, assess, or answer. Imponderability. I don't know. Maybe they perceive many things as imponderable. Imperiousness, according to the principle, after me the deluge. What is imperiousness? Let's look that up. Define imperiousness. What does that mean? That means assuming power or authority without justification, arrogant and domineering. Now, let me just chat about that a little bit. I think you have to be very careful about wanting to assume power or authority without justification. And I hopefully am not guilty of that. Maybe we all are to a degree. Here's another thing, consciencelessness, which is interesting. Pathological craving to defame. And you know what popped in my head just there, which I don't know if it's good to say this or not, but the Alex Jones show, which they seem to be very focused on defaming people. And that would be the conservative right, which I'm more related to. But by the same token, we see the people on the left that have a pathological craving to defame Trump. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that at all, Stephen, that the left and the right are just obsessed with defaming everyone?
I didn't want to turn this into a political thing, but when you're describing all this, yeah, I have to admit that it came to my mind a little bit, yeah.
Did it?
Oh, yeah.
Well, one thing that's very, very interesting is that, you know, Billy has said by 2020, we'll start the process of our government falling apart. So the question is, have we evolved? Is that still what's going to happen? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I just heard something in the news the other day. Didn't Reinhard Bonnke or something say about 2020? Let me look it up here and see if I can find.
Who? Who's this other person you're talking about?
One second here.
Is it like a prophet or a person that's just a predictor?
No. Oh, jeez. You can keep going, Mark. I'll see if I can look it up while you're talking.
Okay. Another thing a psychopath has is a great sense of unfairness. Another example is a great poverty of feeling due to corresponding thoughts. And I think maybe that is just that when you're a psychopath, your thoughts just run out of control, and it's very easy to have your feelings also go into a poverty of feeling. It's interesting that Billy says a psychopath has endorsement of the death penalty. Now, I remember when I was at the youngest age, I always thought that the death penalty was not right, that no one had the right to take another person's life. And then I kind of, as I was in my teens and early 20s, I kind of went over and said, yeah, we got to have the death penalty. Now, since the Meier material, I'm back on the side of that where I don't think the death penalty is right. Another thing that a psychopath likes is endorsement of torture, which is crazy. The other thing that they have is a hate mentality. And I've again to talk about the political dichotomy that we have in our country right now. we have all kinds of people talking about hate speech. Oh, we don't like hate speech. I hear people talk about that. It's just not right to have hate speech. You're talking about, whether it's the transgender community or whatever. We just need to stop hate speech. Well, is it okay for us to hate some things? I hate overpopulation. I hate the abuse of children and animals. I think it is okay to hate some things. I think that that doesn't mean you have a hate mentality. Now, we'd have to go into what a definition of a hate mentality is. But it is one of the things that's on the list of the psychotic behaviors. And if you have 17 of these psychotic behaviors, you are supposed to be a psychopath. The next thing that we're talking about is egoism. Egoism is another psychopathic characteristic. Did you ever find what you were looking up, Stephen?
I'm looking. I think it was something to do with the Federal Reserve. What's the chairman's name?
It's not Bernanke anymore. Still, is it?
That's the name. That's the name I was trying to think of. There.
Yeah. Bernanke. I can't remember his first name. But are they saying that there's something happening by 2020?
I'm still looking. I was trying to find his name. So let me see.
Okay. So, deceit is a characteristic of a psychopath. Manipulating behavior, a lack of a guilt consciousness, a lack of bearing responsibility. This, I think, is the main thing that one of the main thing that the Meier material teaches, is that we're responsible for all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, all of our actions. And you can't really blame it on the devil. You can't blame it on angels or God. We are responsible for ourselves. Another thing that a psychopath has is a lack of deep-reaching thoughts and feelings. So you should be a deep thinker and a deep feeler. Go ahead if you had something, Stephen.
Just clear my throat too, but yeah, I did. It says former Fed chair, our economy is going off a cliff in 2020.
He says that. He predicts this.
Yeah, seriously. It says U.S. getting a stimulus at the wrong moment. So
who's lying here? I don't know, man. I mean, Billy has said that our dollar will be worthless shortly. I hope that's not true. I'll be honest. There's a lot of things I hope Billy's wrong about.
He says, let's see here. It says the stimulus is going to hit the economy in a big way this year and next year, and then in 2020, Wile E. Coyote is going to go off the cliff. Bernanke said, I don't know how you pronounce his name, referring to the whole hapless character in the Roadrunner cartoon series. So
the success our economy is having is going to be followed by a great collapse, is what this is saying.
That's what he's saying. I'll send you the link here, but yeah.
Yeah, please do. That's pretty interesting. One of the things that Trump has done, and it's kind of interesting that we're becoming a tad political here, because I was a supporter of Trump, I voted for him, but one of the things when he did that whole attack on Syria, the second attack on Syria, I was like, man, maybe this guy is a globalist. Maybe when push comes to shove, he may be not globalism heavy like Hillary. He may be globalism light. Or maybe he's just completely incompetent. I think Billy was saying something along those lines. I don't know which it is. I really can't tell you. But I was really shocked that he went to that second attack towards Syria. Have you ever heard the 7 nations? I think it was, what was the general that came out and said that? Oh, I sometimes forget his name. He was the leader of NATO. And he said that he went to the Pentagon and he saw a memo that we were supposed to attack 7 nations or something.
I think I saw that on, what was that? Yeah, it was a link that you sent me before. I remember seeing that. It was on the Alex Jones show, I think.
Yeah. I want to type this in. Attack 7 nations. Wesley Clark, of course.
There you go. Yep.
Wesley Clark. So, and this seems to be the game plan of this dark, deep state that seems to be functioning. So I think there is a great war going on behind the scenes in our government right now. So again, we were talking about psychopaths, and maybe that's the perfect analogy, that our government is being run by psychopaths. I mean, if we're a country, a nation, a world that's ill in our consciousness, it seems likely that we would be ruled by psychopaths. So
That's true.
Yeah, lack of behavioral control, lack of self-responsibility, absence of concern and feelings for others. You know, the one thing that I see a lot is destruction of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's part of this lack of a guilt conscience they talk of. Or, you know what it also is I think a lack of deep-reaching thoughts and feelings. Because if you have deep-reaching thoughts and feelings, you will feel one of the things I'm seeing continually right now, I don't know if you guys are getting that, I guess you're in Michigan, is that a lot of the utility companies right now are going through and they're destroying all the trees around the utility lines around here. And all these beautiful trees I love to drive past every day. I get a sense of well-being from seeing these beautiful trees. And now they've hacked them to pieces. They're spraying this poison around that turns everything brown. How can these people do this? How can you not see that that's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any comment?
Oh, I'm in agreement. It's even where I live right now. It's there's so many more people here. From when I grew up, it used to be nothing but woodland, and now it's subdivisions, and that's just in a short 30 years.
Yeah. I need to cover overpopulation. Boy, I need to get back on that. I've talked to Frosty Wooldridge, and this fall he may be willing to have a regular time on the show. So, do you remember Frosty?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd just like to give him a regular time on the show. I'll just step back and shut up because nobody speaks better than that guy. He will just, and that's the biggest problem we got.
Mm-hmm.
Overpopulation.
Yeah, it's just there's so many things that are attached to that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it makes sense that that's something that Billy is prioritizing, that, hey, this is something that has to be brought under control. Otherwise, you're going to have major problems and things are going to take long periods of time to recover from.
To correct themselves.
Right.
And I know a lot of people on the Revolution radio show here would totally disagree with me on this. One of the things that I think is that people have to realize, hopefully people will retain this thought, is that yes, it's true, you can cram all the people in the entire world, like all 7 or 9 billion, how many there are in maybe a couple hundred square miles in Texas. But what are these people going to eat? Mm-hmm. Well, if you're going to feed them cattle, if they're Texans and everybody gets one cow, which for your whole life, which isn't a lot, to tell you the truth, it takes about 2 acres to support one cow. Well, that means right away, just for the beef that those 7 to 9 billion people eat, you're going to have 14 billion acres of additional land just to support the cattle. Now, I don't know how many square miles 14 billion acres is. These are some things I need to do. I have all these to-do things. Now think about that. Then you've got to support that. You've got to have the chickens, the ham, the pigs, if you have any of those, turkey. And how many billions of acres for all those people that are, say, crammed? Let's cram 9 9 billion people into 200 square miles or whatever they want to do. So anyway, that's one of the things, Stephen, that I'm also pondering. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, is I think this whole lack of control of our thoughts has kind of squelched our ability to think things through. And that's one thing that I've noticed more than anything else, is that as I'm studying this Meier material, it has totally enhanced my ability to think things through logically. Have you noticed any of that?
Oh, for sure. A good example here is we all want people to prosper and to be in good health and to have a standard of living that's high. We say that, but is that really true? Because if the 4 or 5 billion people on planet Earth that make less than $4 a day had our standard of living, we'd be out of resources. So really, do we practice what we preach? Because yes, I want to see people not suffer, but if they all came to our standard of living, it wouldn't work. We simply would run out of resources very quickly. And that's just something we have to wake up to and say, listen, I mean, as a group of humans, what can we do to resolve this problem peacefully?
One of the things that I often contemplate, I think it's in my notes there, I'd have to go look it up real quick, but I think of a lot of the folks in Africa that are living under the worst conditions in certain countries, they have this real high infant mortality. Mm-hmm. And it's not unusual for a woman to lose 6 or 8 children. Mm. And I think about, that the trauma that must cause to a woman to see 6 or 8 of her children die of starvation. What in the world? I mean, that would be horrific to go through. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine that, and the scar, and her thinking what it takes to try to recover from that trauma? Because the circular thinking that you would have over and over again over that, I mean, that would be absolutely devastating. Because I've studied this material for many years, and for example, I've talked about this. One little cat around here that it was really the neighbor's cat. I tried to help, and he eventually got run over, and I buried him in my yard. I felt so bad about that for the longest time, because I felt that I somehow could have done more. I fed the little guy. I tried to help him out, but I can you imagine living through 6 to 8 of your children dying?
No, I can't.
I mean, I would be a basket case. Even with all the studying I've done, I don't think I could deal with it. So that's what overpopulation is doing. Mm-hmm. Think about that, the trauma that we're putting on ourselves. And you were saying about the woodlands disappearing. I noticed that I commuted into Columbus several times a week. I thank God I thank creation or whatever you want to say, that I can work from home a couple of days a week. But I see this, there was this one beautiful area right when 161 goes into 270. I used to love to drive past that all the time. It had a pond and beautiful trees all over. And they've knocked down almost all those trees, and all these apartments are going up, boop, 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 all over the place. And this is the destruction of the creation that we're seeing. Now, you'd think that people would see the wrongness of this. And that's the one thing I experienced a lot growing up, is I was just like where I lived in Cincinnati. I would see this all the time. All the trees, boom, gone. People taking bulldozers, destroy all these trees. And you see this kind of devastated area, and you look at this, and maybe it's the lack of awareness of the consciousness of people. Do you think, Stephen, that would allow them to do that, or what do you think?
Oh, sure. Even I look at myself, and I remember being a child, and when China was going into the limiting of the children, and I remember thinking it was wrong. because it was who are they to tell their people what to do? And I look at it totally different now and say, well, they're trying to bring things, under control, because they knew that if they didn't, they would have large scale suffering. I'm not saying that the way they did it was correct. I really don't know, but I'm just saying for people to govern themselves is important, and to do it with wisdom and understanding and knowledge as to why should I have fewer children at this point in time. It's all a personal choice,
One of the things I remember Frosty Wooldridge telling me about 50 lanes of traffic going around Beijing. I didn't believe him. I really didn't believe him. I told him he was exaggerating. He had to be. No, he showed me the links on YouTube. I'm just stunned. I'm looking at these links. 50 lanes of traffic going around Beijing. I mean, that's the insanity of the thinking. People say, oh, there's no overpopulation problem. We just need more lanes. So, you'd think when you get up to 10 lanes or something that, this isn't solving our problem. No, they build 20 lanes. Wait a minute, that still isn't solving our problem. They build 30 lanes, and they continue until they get 50 lanes. I mean, this is another tremendous example of the kind of we are an insane society rushing headlong to our own destruction. Is one of the things that Semyase said to Billy, which I've always held on to. We are an insane society rushing headlong to our own destruction. I never really understood why she was saying that, but it seemed to carry so much weight, what she was saying. And over the years, I've come to a greater understanding of what that really meant.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Were you going to comment?
I was just thinking too, even what we were hitting before, those 7 steps of education, and how it all starts with you as a person inwardly, and then it expands from there to your family, then your friends, and so on from there. But it has to start from each person, and you and I both know that it may take a long time for us to come to a point of understanding of letting go of certain belief systems that we had.
Yeah, on values, right?
There you go.
On values, we have ideas which are not completely thought through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I didn't know any better about population until I studied the Meier material.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? I would listen
100%.
I would listen to these people make these arguments, and I'm like, oh, maybe they're right, And then, but now I know, and I'm able to think through this a little bit farther. So it's astonishing to me. I remember I had this, and we're running out of time here, which is, do you know what time it is? I have 5:55 on one clock, and
5:55 is mine too. Yep.
Okay, so the music is going to pop in at any moment, and the show's going to be over. So anyway, I can tell this story very, very quickly. I had this guy that used to listen to my show. I don't think he does anymore. And he actually, and I would never, ever do this. I don't know. This guy actually came out in this general area, and I met with him for just a short period of time. But I'm really funny about that sort of thing. So don't give anybody any. I just don't do that very often. So, but anyways, the one thing that he really had the problem with was when Semyase said, we are an insane society rushing headlong to our own destruction. And that's probably why he stopped listening to the show. But I remember that, and that struck me so odd. Well, on that note, I'll say we're Ohio Exopolitics, and I appreciate everyone coming to the show. Thanks, Stephen.
You're welcome.
We're out of here. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.